Hello. It is time to go through one of the most time honored traditions on this channel, which is to add another background and another recording setup to this channel. I am now recording. I had Thanksgiving. We went away for the weekend as a family, and I am now recording from a bedroom after we've gone away. So we're adding a new setup, and that's exciting. I mean, who doesn't want a new setup as part of Zealandism? It was getting a little too cozy. I mean, think about how many times in a row I had recorded from my actual desk. Now I'm sitting on the floor, the laptop's on the bed, and I'm talking about the Qatar World Cup still. There's like two constants in my life. One, I'm going to be recording Zealandisms from basically anywhere. And two, I'm eventually going to end up talking about the Qatar World Cup again. Eventually. Right? Doesn't matter. You could put me on the moon. I could be recording a Zealandism on the moon, and there'd be something that happens around the Qatar World Cup again. Which, in case anybody had ever wondered how I felt about the Qatar World Cup, I'm sure it was great for the 10 Qatari people, right? And I realize that's a hyperbole, but it's definitely something that one, I don't think you should ever have a World Cup hosted in a nation that obviously we're going to get to actual stuff, not just my opinion, right? But I don't think you should ever have a World Cup hosted in a nation that's never qualified for the World Cup before. I just think that that's kind of an insult to the competitive integrity of the game. Now, obviously, you could host a World Cup in a nation like South Africa that's qualified but doesn't necessarily qualify most of the time. That's fine. At least they've made it before, right? You don't want a team making its World Cup debut in the actual World Cup itself. And of course, this is before all of the other weird considerations and just the different way the Qatari society works compared to most societies with the amount of imported labor and it's just different, and there are things in it that are bad. And that's not me saying that there are things in it that are bad. That's FIFA saying that there are things in it that are bad, right? Because FIFA released a report that I guess it just took forever to write this report, saying that there were severe human rights violations in Qatar. Not me, not some, fake news media, right? FIFA released a report saying there were human rights violations in Qatar. And then, of course, FIFA promptly, at least according to the people that wrote the report within FIFA itself, kind of ignored it and then sent money elsewhere. They didn't send money to a bad place. They used their $50 million legacy fund in other areas. But I'm just blown away by the fact that there's a report from FIFA on this stuff in the first place. So what the hell am I talking about? Well, that's what I'm going to tell you now. They wrote a report. This is an article from The Guardian, by the way, written by Paul McInnes, just to give Paul some credit here because he's the person that educated me in after I saw the initial headlines and this sort of thing. He's the person that educated me on what actually happened here. FIFA's Subcommittee on Human Rights and Social Responsibility has found that the game's world body has a responsibility to provide financial remedy to workers who suffered loss as a result of employment related to the 2022 World Cup. That's a stunning sentence for a couple of reasons. It's kind of like finding out the Empire in Star Wars has a subcommittee for improving rebel scum relations, right? Like that's how this reads. Right? It's like finding out that the Empire has a subcommittee for improving rebel scum relations. Apparently, FIFA has a subcommittee on human rights and social responsibility. You also find out later, right, that FIFA are signatories of the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which hold companies responsible for the impact of their work. I didn't know that. That's probably the reason that there is a subcommittee on human rights and social responsibility. But this subcommittee has conducted an investigation that showed that they have a financial responsibility to alleviate the suffering of people that worked on the actual World Cup situation themselves. Now, there's a Qatar Legacy Fund, right? It's $50 million. I briefly mentioned that earlier. It is specifically around the legacy from the Qatar World Cup. I don't necessarily know where these funds have come from, but it was obviously set aside, and then they were going to decide where those funds were going to be sent. But 2 days after this report was published, FIFA announced right here that the $50 million fund would be used on international development projects instead. Now, they get into this later. And I'll give FIFA a little credit for this because I feel like that's almost a little disingenuous. It's going to be spent on projects in association with the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, and the UN Refugee Agency. Today I feel like a refugee or whatever the hell, Infantino happens to have been saying recently. And the person that wrote this report, or at least really helped with this report, is this dude from Norway named Klaveness, who said that it was very positive, but in no way a substitute for the remedy that is pointed out in this report. This is kind of what I was touching on earlier. Basically, that they are giving the money in a positive direction, but not giving the money in the way that the report recommends at all, not helping out directly the people that this report believes were affected by the World Cup. And I've read through this entire thing, and it is fascinating the type of report stuff that they're talking about here, because in the report, apparently, what they detail is they go through the work of finding workers that are FIFA's responsibility and workers that are somebody else's responsibility. They even acknowledge things like, I don't want to say like fake news media, but they acknowledge media pressure or whatever, trying to force, as they see it, FIFA being responsible for everything. But even in this report from this subcommittee on human rights and global impact or whatever the hell it is, they acknowledge that there are workers that FIFA is responsible for and that there were multiple quote unquote severe violations or severe human rights. They don't call them violations, right? I don't think FIFA would ever allow them to be called violations. They call them severe human rights impacts. Right, severe impacts on human rights from FIFA, and they acknowledge that multiple severe human rights impacts occurred from the 2022 World Cup, which might like fucking obviously, right? I mean, a bunch of different news organizations, ones that you respect and ones that you don't. I don't know your life, right? But a lot of news organizations sent people to the Qatar World Cup, interviewed people, and at least detailed a system that was taking advantage of people. It was very obvious, right? And there is a huge difference between respecting other people's cultures and making sure that people just aren't being taken advantage of. In a really aggressive and serious way. I felt comfortable making that distinction for a long time, but I think now that you have FIFA showing up and acknowledging that that sort of thing was happening, that there were people that FIFA was responsible for in this whole process, that will maybe make people even a little more comfortable going, yeah, maybe there was something going on here that wasn't okay. I'll read the quote here. It actually does the analysis of the categorization of workers in areas where FIFA has responsibility. This is Klaveness, by the way, same dude. It also says something about why FIFA is responsible, and it attaches to Article 6. It's important these responsibilities are not just the result of political pressure or media pressure. Fake news! It's actually within the statutes of FIFA and need implementation. These frameworks can now be used if we all fight for it and work for it in the future. But screw my opinions on it. I'm going to give you the actual words that are written here by The Guardian. It acknowledges a number of measures FIFA undertook with Qatari authorities to improve conditions. But a number of severe human rights impacts did occur in Qatar from 2010 through 2022 for a number of workers connected to the World Cup, and that a credible argument can be made that FIFA contributed to some of those impacts. I'm going to be honest, if you are writing a report for an organization that is going to end up accusing those organizations of contributing to human rights violations, that's how you have to word it. Because you don't want to get fired, right? If you are writing a report that is going to accuse the organization you work for of human rights violations, you have to acknowledge the steps that they took to try and avoid those things from happening, and then, say that you're able to form a credible argument that FIFA contributed to some of those impacts. I mean, obviously, this is a kid gloves way of saying everything, but it's also saying everything that they were able to do this in the first place. And there's one other part of this story that says a lot, that apparently this report was done 11 months ago. Right? It was written and submitted last December. Okay, but FIFA didn't release it until Friday. FIFA did not release it until midnight Central European time on Friday. So they're trying to bury it. You put it on midnight on a Friday, 11 months after it was released, and they obviously released it 2 days before, or they released it right before basically they decided the legacy fund was going to these other more generic charities instead of specifically to the people affected by human rights. What do they call it? severe human rights impacts in Qatar. Now that that is, I think sometimes the cover up's the greatest sign of everything, and not that this is some sort of giant orchestrated cover up. It's more of they had this report done so they could say they had it done. It was a kid glove way of saying they violated human rights and were responsible, at least in part, for the violation of human rights in the construction and the production of this World Cup. They then buried it and then just rooted the number into a couple of rooted the legacy fund into a couple of charities, and they're like, good to go, baby. Just figured you guys would be interested to know that FIFA actually did a report on this whole thing. Because I mean, honestly, it's more than I thought FIFA was going to do. I thought they were just never going to talk about it again. World Cup headed to Saudi Arabia, by the way. That's the other part of this article, I guess.